Hello, this is Ruben Romero with Underground Living. And for those who are new to our channel, Underground Living isn't just about us renovating a space that's underground. It's also about exploring other ways of living and alternative ways, things that a lot of people don't know about. So I'm really excited to have with us today, Tom, if I butcher your name, I'm really sorry, but I think it's Mcelroy.
Yeah, McElroy, you got it.
And he's got a YouTube channel called Tom Mcelroy Wild Survival, I'm sorry, and a website, Wild Survival Skills. But I guess without further ado, I'll go ahead and let Tom introduce himself a little bit and tell us a little bit about how he got into survival and a little bit about himself.
So you got it right, Tom Mcelroy. And I got into this stuff kind of before it was cool, back when, nobody had an idea, never thinking, I'd have a career in doing this. Like back then it was just kind of a fun thing to do, something I was super passionate about. But I got into it reading about it when I was probably like 15, because back then all I wanted to do was like hop boxcar trains and travel the world and have all these adventures. And so I basically thought, after reading Kerouac and John Muir, Kerouac was eating out of dumpsters to get food while he was traveling, and John Muir would just go out in the forest and spend a month hiking Yosemite and starve himself to death and then come back and, get fat again. And I was like, that doesn't work, And so I stumbled upon some books about survival, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I traveled and could just eat all the wild edible plants and live off the land and not have to sponge off of the society, kind of that I was trying to get away from at the time. And so I just poured myself into survival, and I still absolutely love to travel, but survival kind of took off on its own as an interest that even without traveling, I just got really caught up in doing primitive skills and learning from native cultures and everything else. So in the past 20 years, I've been teaching survival. I've traveled the world, lived with remote tribes, and opened my own school to kind of pass down all the skills that I learned.
Mm-hmm. But you never did the boxcar jumping.
Yeah, I did a bit of that.
Oh, you did a little bit of that. Okay.
I've dabbled in just about every type of traveling adventure I could come up with.
Which we don't recommend. It is illegal.
You can definitely get your butt kicked and get in a lot of trouble with, it's almost more dangerous just because of the other people that travel. But that's part of the Americana thing of like, you read books about these guys back in the day in the 30s and stuff like that, hopping boxcar trains. And there was just something that appealed to me about that, that feeling of freedom that you get from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So like kind of like early inspired, maybe like kind of like On the Road, Jack Kerouac, freedom, and then you found survival and said, hey, like this is another way of exploring that same stuff.
Yeah, basically after high school, I started studying survival and taking classes, and there was really only like one big school back then you could take classes at for it. That was in '94, and then after that, I decided to test it out with two of the guys that were taking classes, and we moved out about 10 miles into the woods, and we lived off the land for a year. And so we would rub sticks together to make fires. We would fish and hunt and try to gather wild edible plants. And my shelter was made out of sticks and leaves. And we just kind of did it for a year. And, again, it wasn't a thing back then. And then after that, it kind of took off in the media. And became a big thing. And so I was kind of ahead of the game, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of people, I'm sure they take those classes and they never do anything. I read, I don't know if you're familiar with the director, Robert Rodriguez. He did he's probably best known for the Spy Kids movies, but he also did, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. His first movie, he was like, well, look, he's like, all of these movies that are in the Spanish action film genre aren't that great. And he's like, I could probably do something and maybe go direct to video kind of in the Spanish market for videos. So he, over the summer of film school, he just went and filmed this thing, and his career took off from that. In fact, like the original movie he made was the movie they released in theaters on like a $10,000 to $20,000 budget or something like that, like an unheard of amount to
Yeah,
make a full feature film.
yeah.
But like a lot of people, they take the classes, but you know, in a lot of ways, I don't blame them. They don't really teach you. Like you almost have to just kind of go and learn and do it. Did you find that as you guys were, okay, we took the class, was it a little bit of an awakening of what you didn't know after the class?
Yeah, there was definitely so many, they would teach you, this is how you make a fire, when you can go to like, Home Depot wasn't even around back then, but you can go to Home Depot and get some lumber and carve out your bow drill kits and rub sticks together to make a fire. But it wasn't like, okay, now you're in the middle of the forest. How you actually make this like book information way more practical to living off the land and finding all your resources around you. And so it helped, but there's a far cry from like reading a book, taking a class, or even like, watching something on YouTube to actually going out and doing it. And I think that's where like people nowadays fail with survival, is unfortunately so many people are like, oh, I saw it on YouTube, therefore I'm going to be okay. There's a decade of practice that happens before you can do the stuff that is actually going to keep you alive.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, I don't want to knock people watching things on YouTube. I think it's probably similar to your class, but they'd probably go out and be like, okay, that the only way they're probably going to learn is to go out there and start to do some stuff, and probably ideally with some good supervision.
It's like you can't just see it and expect to do it. I mean, back in the day, there was no YouTube. There was maybe 5 good books on survival, and we would go to me and these other guys would go to the Museum of Natural History in New York, and they had this amazing display of indigenous people. And they would show like, oh, this is some fire making apparatus that we kind of got a vague sketch of from the Eskimos, or this trap from somewhere in Africa. And we'd sit there with our journals for days, drawing it all out and trying to figure out like, how do we actually take this thing and make it work? Because it's kind of half understood here. And so YouTube is great. I mean, the accelerated learning that you can get nowadays watching a YouTube video, and it's this compiled information of like, thousands of people that are into this stuff nowadays. So looking back, I'm like, man, I wish I had these resources back then. I would have been so much better.
Yeah. Not that I'm recommending you go and watch Tom's video. Like for instance, he's got one on how to survive on an island. You're not going to watch that video and go like, don't maroon yourself on an island and try to survive off of that. But you could start small. Like you could probably watch some videos and be like, okay, I'm going to go camping. Let's.
I hope when people watch those videos, maybe they'll like be able to do 1 or 2 of the things that I do, and it's going to save their life. And it could, where it's like, oh, cool, this is how I make a shelter, which anybody can learn just by watching. And yeah, maybe that helps. But yeah, you're not going to string together the 40 of the things that took me 20 years to get good at, and actually pull it off very well. So yeah, there's just a level of practice like anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think maybe because I'm a little older, I have a family, I look at some of those things and I think initially in my mind, I think, oh yeah, I could do that. But then like my reason kicks in and I think, I'm a little bit older. I don't have quite the stamina and the build and the other things I had going for me, where like I have like the buffer of youth to get me over the hurdles. I think I would be open to it because I like things that challenge me, but at the same time, I'm definitely not going to go, maroon myself or see how long I'm going to last in the desert. That's another great video that Tom did, surviving in the desert.
I had that conversation with, I have a couple friends that are pro skaters, and I became friends with them in my 20s. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll like get into skating so I can hang out with these guys. And after about 10 falls, I was like, this is for like little rubber kids. Like you're going to start this when you're little, not when you're in your mid 20s. And not to say you can't start these things, but there is an aspect to like, when I'm out in the Amazon, these little like 7-year-old kids are probably more talented than any survivalist you see on TV. And they just start young. And that's really the way to become a master at something, is to start it when you're 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. So you teach classes as well, isn't that right?
Yeah, I teach classes all over the world at this point. I just ran a bunch of series on the East Coast, and I've just flown back to California. But yeah, I do classes in desert survival, woodland survival. I have my entire winter is going out to remote islands throughout the world and teaching people. We take them out for 10 days. I train them for 5 and then release them to the other side of the island for 4 days as a group. And they have to take everything they've learned and completely survive as a tribe on their own while I'm just there for security on the other side of the island. And so, yeah, I've gone to Australia and taken people out with the Aborigines and things like that. And just basically taking all the travels and fun things and adventures that I did, and somewhat still do in my younger years, and turn them into classes. Because as I'm doing them, I'm like, everybody's going to love to do this. It's so much fun that, yeah, I just turned it into a business.
So what kind of people sign up for those types of classes? Like do you get like all sorts of people, all sorts of background, all sorts of ages?
Yeah, that's the cool thing is there is no common denominator between everybody. And I think it's a great equalizer. It's like I'll have classes with like government figures and like the guy that scraped together, change that he begged from all of his friends just to get out there. And he like had to hop trains to get to the place that he could get there because he didn't have enough money. And when you get out in survival, it doesn't matter who's super rich and who's super poor. It's like, well, who can climb that tree and get a coconut for the rest of us? And so it's like immediately everybody is equal. And I really like that aspect. But as far as who it attracts, yeah, it runs the board. I mean, we have, famous musicians and government people, super poor people, school teachers. My buddy Matt, who I run a class with, was just, he was in that island survival video with me, was just doing a bunch of stuff with Hugh Jackman. So it's like, it's all over the map, and it's really cool. The opportunities it opens because of that is that like, there's no particular type of person that does it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm guessing it's probably, 18 to probably 60s. Would that be maybe the age range of people you get?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I would say if you had to condense it a little bit more, I mean, that's the range. Probably the most are going to be between 25 and 45, something like that. Just because they have the money to travel and do things like that. And they're not feeling intimidated by, being older. But I mean, I'm 44, so I guess I'm in that, getting close to that upper bracket there a little.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So like, what's some of the, what would you say was your most challenging, survival scenario that you've gone through?
I definitely, I mean, I've done pretty well in survival. I feel like I kind of come out with a pretty, come out pretty good. But definitely in the Amazon, I was out there I flew out there to this tribe that you're not necessarily supposed to go to. And I was able to pretend I was a missionary and get out there. And then I went back and spent 3 months, and I talked to one of the young guys in the tribe that could speak broken Spanish to take me down the river in the Amazon to visit all the villages of their people. And these guys are full hunter-gatherers, like fully, running around naked and hunting pigs with spears and stuff like that. And I got really, really sick. We were doing an 18-hour canoe ride down the river, sitting on the gunnels of this really crappy wooden canoe. And yeah, just being ridiculously sick as it's dumping rain. And so I think that was really challenging. Did one where actually I dragged my brother on this one, but we went to see, have you heard of the Tarahumara, the running Indians in Mexico?
No.
McDougall wrote a book called Born to Run. But these guys basically, nobody ever told them they couldn't. And so in their culture, running 100, 150 miles is like no big deal. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, we just went to visit our friends. So we ran to their house nonstop. And so they've entered Ironmans and all this stuff, and they just like kick a ball and smoke cigarettes and win these Ironman races. And so I was like, I've got to see this, and they live at this canyon in Mexico that since the conquistadors came through, they've just been hiding at the bottom of this canyon. And so they're just down there, and I was able to talk to somebody that knew them, because you can't just go down, they don't appreciate that. But I found this old gold prospector guy to take me down there. But the whole time we are, running from drug mafia people that constantly work their way through there and make the Tarahumara carry drugs for them, and ditching into bushes and stuff. And my guide was like, hey, if we can bring money to the Tarahumara, they'll give us food and corn, so there's no point in carrying food. They would more appreciate getting some money from us to buy food. And we're like, great. And lo and behold, it was a drought for like 3 years. And so they were running on their last teeny bits of food to feed their children, and they're starving. And so we're down there for like 2 weeks, hiking 20 miles a day. And we were like, well, we're not taking your food. Like, we'll give you money, but we're not taking food out of your children's mouths. So for about 2 weeks, we'd eat like 3 spoonfuls of corn a day. And I mean, I was with my brother, and, you know, we'd just be talking. One of us would just completely black out and fall over, and you just pick him up and go, all right, come on, let's keep going. And yeah, that was sketchy. And at the same time, running from drug mafias and trying not to, you know, get kidnapped and things like that. So
How old were you when you did that?
I wasn't probably 30.
Okay.
Like probably just about 10 or so years ago. But yeah, just, I mean, and I love that stuff. Like, any trip that I do where everything goes right, I come home and people go, oh, how was your trip? And I go, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, we did what I said I was going to do, and story's over. But when everything shit hits the fan and everything goes wrong, sorry, I swore, then it's amazing. Like, those are the trips that, like, I look back and I just start cracking up and I smile later in life. So it's almost like when things are going wrong, there's part of me in the back of my head. I mean, I'm nervous up front, but there's part of me in the back of my head's like, whoa, this is crazy. This is going to be funny later if we make it out of this.
Yeah. So did you run into any of the drug runners?
I mean, there is little roads back there occasionally. And so you'd be crossing a road and all of a sudden you'd hear these trucks like bombing down the road, and you know, our guide was Tarahumara. And so he would just take off like scared, you know, and anytime you're with a native person in their territory and they get scared, like, that's when you're like, oh man, I should be really scared. And so no, it was okay until the very last day. After 2 weeks, we finally like hike out of this canyon, and we don't know how to get back to our train that takes us to, which is this crazy old train that was created to carry gold through the Sierra. And we have to get back to it. And so we kind of hitchhike around, and we finally get to this first house when you get off the dirt roads in the canyon. And little did we know, it's the drug mafia guy's house. And we kind of are like, hey, can we stay here? And we've been trying to avoid these people the entire time. And little do we know, like, as we start to meet him, he's very nice, but then we start to realize, oh, this is like the house of the guy that's running this whole drug operation. And he was totally nice. It was all good. But like, yeah, for all our avoidance, we ended up staying at his house for the last night. It's just crazy, you know, and I love that stuff. You know, that's the stuff that like turns a story into something good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as you survive it, then that's a good story.
Yeah, you know, you're puckered up the entire time, but when you make it out of it, you just look at each other and you laugh, and you're just like, wow, that you did it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, you choose to go down these little rabbit holes, and you just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it seems not as crazy to you because you come used to it. But then when you kind of come back to everybody else and you tell them, they're like, what are you doing? Like, that is just insane. Like, what world do you live in? And I love that aspect of like, we all create our own little worlds, and we're all living in them separately, yet associating with each other. And I've just tried to keep going down that rabbit hole of like, oh, how weird can this get? Chasing these weird adventures in remote areas.
So there's got to be something like, I don't know, what do you think it is that like sets, I mean, not everyone has that sort of sense of like, oh, I got to get out there, I've got to challenge me. I mean, you think that's just something you were born with? Is that something you developed? Is that something like just the more you do stuff, the more confident you feel? Combination of all of those things? I'm not sure, because like
every single point of what it could be is like, there's a snowball effect of just continuing to go down this rabbit hole that you know, when I was 18, I lived in the woods, and of course that's weird. And then I start, you know, my best friends after that are these old like medicine men from different native tribes, because they were the ones that kind of knew about survival. And I'm thrust into this, you know, sweat lodges every day and native ceremonies. And then I start living with indigenous people. So it just is this big snowball effect. But at the same time, like when I traced it all back, when I was about 6, I saw some Disney movie where this girl hops boxcar trains with her pet wolf in the 30s. And I remember just being like, as a kid, I was like, that's me. That's what I want to do with my life. And so it's amazing how, if you really do trace it back to like who you are and what you are, how far back that can be traced to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like with us, so it was probably about 7 years ago that we had a similar experience, like where we're trying to figure out, well, where are we going to live? What are we going to do? And I've worked online for about the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And about 7 years ago, we found these underground old AT&T communication bunkers, and we just thought, that's it. that's what we're going to do. We're going to get one. It took us 7 years to get one. But and that's what we're doing. And I love it. Like, it's hard, and I'm bruised and cut and sore from the renovation. But I think, I don't know what it is inside of you, but like you see something that's just like different, and like you just immediately know that's what I got to do.
And then it's like I remember hearing this TV show once I thought it was really cool, where the guy said, be careful of what you get good at, because you get stuck on that track, and eventually there's no getting off. There's no going back and being like, oh, I'm going to learn a new skill and start a whole new career. And it's almost like you have to just keep going forward with what you've done. And I grew up in this super wealthy Fairfield County, Connecticut, where it's like Greenwich, Connecticut, and all the super wealthy money from New York goes. And so I grew up, my parents were school teachers, so we were not wealthy, but I grew up watching the height of the American dream of these people that, got on these career paths and had these huge houses, and they spent their entire life from 8 to 6 supporting those houses and those lifestyles, and were really miserable. And so I think that shaped me as well, as far as like seeing the pinnacle of the American dream. And I was like, well, that doesn't look that cool. Like, whatever it is that, like, I'm supposed to be reaching for, it just doesn't seem to be that cool. And I look at my life where I'm like broke. I'm okay now, but like I've spent half my life broke and in the dirt. And I'm like, I wouldn't trade this for millions, or that security that those people have. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm happy I went down this weird rabbit hole, but yeah, sometimes I get nervous that I'm never going to get off of it.
Do you worry about that? Do you worry about like that at some point you're going to be too old to do to do this anymore? I mean, is that creeping into your mind space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 44 now. And so at this point, I'm kind of like, okay, time to like, I look at the other side. I was like, okay, where does this end? And it ends like where it's like, I'm some expat in Costa Rica, like alone on a beach, high-fiving himself for having traveled his whole life. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I want either. And so, yeah, I mean, at this point, like I can't, when I'm 50 or 60 or who knows how far I can push it, but I'm not going to be climbing coconut trees and helping students, make fires with a bow drill on a remote island. So yeah, I have a plan of like how to, get other instructors and start running these programs to the point where at some point I can back out of it a little bit. So it'll be hard to admit to myself one day, but it'll probably happen.
Well, and it's telling also that you say, well, a little bit.
Yeah,
might still go up the coconut tree on occasion.
Yeah.
When I'm 60.
Yeah, I mean, I have students that are 60 and they're super good shape and they're still pulling it off. And they're like, hey, just got to keep at it, and like do yoga and work out. And like, you can really push this stuff pretty far. So I respect that. But yeah, I mean, if I broke my leg really bad one day, like career's over for a long time, so I have to worry about things like that of like, or plan for them. And I haven't done that yet. So that's in the future. One of the things I really appreciate about survival at people ask me like, what's this all about? Is it really about surviving the end of the world? Or whatever a lot of people get into this stuff for. And I think, obviously it's a nice benefit of knowing this stuff. But at the same time, like I lived in the woods when I was 18 to 19 for a year. I spent $300 for the entire year. And I ate off the land and everything else. And I just have spent my life being like, oh no, what if like everything falls apart? What am I going to do? Like, what's my backup plan? And I think generally when normal people ask themselves that question, what's my backup plan? What am I going to do? They say, well, okay, I'm not going to take any chances in life because I don't have a good answer to that question. I'm always going to play it safe. And for me, there's always been like, well, I could just go move back to the Pine Barrens and spend $300 for the year and live in a leaf hut. And granted, it's not an ideal situation by any means, and I don't want to do that. But there's a comfort in knowing that you can take care of yourself, even if everything else falls through. And that allows you to kind of live the life that you want to live, knowing that you have the ultimate backup plan that even the wealthiest person may not have, is the ability to, if every system that supports you falls apart, you can still take care of yourself.
Yeah. No, that's got to be comforting. Although, I think we've really become so insulated, right? Like I think probably one of the exciting parts about doing what you do is that you're taking away all of the modern installations that we've built up around us to protect us, like homes are insulate us from the weather, and grocery stores insulate us from having to figure out what not just where at one point it wasn't like, what am I going to eat? It's like, am I going to eat?
Right.
I'm sure when you're on the island, you're not thinking, do I want turtle tonight or fish?
Out there, we eat like mangoes and coconut and make lobster soups and stuff. So it's not bad on the islands, but yeah, I get your point. In survival, it's like you take what you can. And that, yeah, we've grown so accustomed that everything's always going to be there for us, and the supermarkets are going to be stocked. And I mean, you see it, and you must talk about this too, but like we saw last year with Corona, it was like the second there was a run on something, it was like supply of toilet paper was gone. And if there was a run on everything, like our systems aren't built to handle it, and like those things can shut down really quick. And so Matt, again, my friend that did that island video with, lives in St. Croix. And they, after that huge hurricane 3-4 years ago that they just killed the whole island, they didn't have power for 6 months. And him and his wife had lived in the woods for about 5 years in a leaf hut before they had their house. And they're like, yeah, no big deal. Like, it was totally fine. We didn't really even notice. It just felt like we were back living in the woods again. And while the rest of the island was kind of in panic, they were like, oh, this is totally fine. We're cool. Like, we'll just make a campfire and cook our food over the campfire. So yeah, I mean, they always say you're like 3 days away from full breakdown, if those supply systems stop, so. Yeah.
And that's, I think, one thing that when we were trying to figure out before we found that there were these AT&T bunkers. And I have a background in art. So like, I fell in love with the space, right? So like I really love space. I don't know if you're familiar with installation art, but it deals a lot with space. I saw one that someone had renovated, fell in love with it. But before we even found them, we were thinking about, well, what if we bought an island? What if we lived on an island or did something, like we were just trying to think like, where do we want to end up, right? I could live almost anywhere. I will need to get internet, but how far could we push this? Mm-hmm. And so we thought about an island, but you're really isolated on an island, and unless you know how to, get water and food and all of those things, like, if your supply chain gets cut off somehow because of, storms or whatever, I mean, you're in trouble, right? And I was not looking. I had a small family at the time and was not looking to put them into any sort of dangerous situation. So yeah, we had to cross that off the list.
One of the classes I run, you should look this up, is in French Polynesia, Tahiti. There's an atoll there where we run our classes, and an atoll's hundreds of islands going around in a circle that used to surround a central volcano. And so we ran our island class on one, but about 5 miles away, and you can just hop between island to island and just swim 100 yards, walk in an island, swim 100 yards, walk in an island. You could go 30 miles in a circle that way. There is a Taiwanese cult that believed that Armageddon was coming. And so they bought an island out there, and they established their camp, and they have a ton of funding. They set up garden systems, and it's pretty amazing. They actually, the government in French Polynesia was like, you're not supposed to be able to actually grow these crops and create soil on islands. Like, how are you people doing this? But they've set up this whole system that makes coconut oil soaps. And so we were able to walk down and actually visit this cult. And there's only a few people holding there now. They started with like 100 to 200, but on their inaugural day, they had all this bad stuff happen that was taken as a bad sign, and everybody bailed. And so now there's like 10 people holding down this Armageddon island for the end of the world. And I assume the rest of the people will flock out there if something bad starts happening, but that's their idea. Really interesting to see that they're just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
Interesting. We, at one point, my wife and I, there was a place in Philadelphia. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's not coming to me. But in, early America, a lot of people were coming here with, religious freedoms and stuff like that. But there was a group of people who came basically to prepare for the end of the world. So early colonists, and they had built like this tiny bunker, and we're going to put a bunch of their stuff and things in there, like, and this is like, yeah, this is like pre-America, early colonist kind of stuff. But I don't know, it's almost like in our culture. Not that the Polynesians are obviously a different culture, but it's almost in our culture, I think, for people to, or in the human psyche, maybe almost even to
have a backup
think
plan.
about these things.
Why
Yeah.
not? I mean, we are wired, our number one, wiring code or whatever is to survive, like keep yourself alive. That's number one in our code, is like every instinct that we have is based on keeping yourself alive and reproducing. And so of course, like when you look at your plan in life and you're like, wait, what's the backup for that when everything falls apart and you don't have an answer? I think if you don't have an answer instinctively in you, is like, uh-oh, like I'm going to live with this nervous feeling for my entire life, because I know I don't have an answer for like what happens when my current plan falls apart, and just doing anything to block that, I think really helps satisfy that fear that people carry around with them every day. Is like having an answer really helps you live your life with a lot more confidence than people that don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've kind of mentioned a few of your classes. So you have an island class
Yes.
that you teach. Tell us about your other classes that you teach.
So I mean, I do everything. We do a lot of survival where it's like go out into the woods. I do a lot of like 6-hour classes where it's just a day. People show up. I kind of run through the order of shelter, water, fire, food, how to trap and hunt and create, just walk off in the landscape and create fires from big sticks together, how to make shelters that keep you warm and dry. And then kind of branch off from that, get into more advanced things. So it'll be just a class on trapping, or we do like bow making class will be like 4 days of just making a bow and arrow that you could hunt any animal on the continent with. And flint knapping and basket making, hide tanning, making your own clothing. So basically the gist of it is like, if I were to walk off in the woods with absolutely nothing, maybe just a knife, how do I use all the resources on the landscape to not just survive, but kind of eventually thrive and create your own little society and provide for everything you could possibly ever want just from the landscape. So it's kind of survival and primitive skills. And then I do just trips, where we'll do like a desert trip for 5 days in the Mojave Desert, kind of the border of the Mojave Sonoran Desert. And we just go out and live in caves and make fires off the landscape. And yeah, just walking in different environments. I've done stuff in Australia and gone up with the Aborigines in this little village called Maparu. And we just go out and they kind of teach, really, like I'm just kind of there to facilitate, but they're teaching hunting and what plants they use to eat and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so it kind of depends on year to year what I feel like doing and what happens. I go up to Alaska and run trips up there. So kind of where anybody wants to go, we go up, scout it out ahead of time, make sure that there's going to be a good class in that, and then just pull people up there and show them all the basic things in different environments of how to survive.
So are all of the classes, or the majority of the classes, ones that you like, they basically stem all from you? Are you working with other organizations, like they call you in and bring you in as a teacher? Like how does that generally work?
Yeah, I mean, most of them I'd say were through me. Sometimes I partner up with friends. If I'm going to co-teach with somebody, it's generally somebody I've known since like the 90s that I know is like, there was a core group of us in the 90s that were just obsessed with this stuff. Like for 10 years, we probably didn't talk about anything. You'd go out to eat and you'd be like, oh, what kind of brains do you use on your hide? Like that was all we ever talked about. And the conversations never varied. So I know this core group of people that are, the best of the best out there. And so I teach with them. But yeah, if somebody calls me up, like I've had groups, like a group called the Young Marines that I've done stuff up in Alaska, where they say, hey, we've got all these kids that we're trying to instill survival, but also like the ability to work together and all this stuff. Could we take them out on like a backpacking / survival trip? And so, yeah, I get a lot of calls with stuff like that. And Yeah, anything that works out if somebody wants it, I'm sure, we just make a class out of it.
Yeah. So if there's a group, they can contact you and figure out something out, but also you offer like, hey, we're going to do this, and that people could probably go to Wilderness Survival Skills and see the other classes.
Survivalskills.com.
Well, I'm sorry, Wild Survival Skills. And,
Wilderness.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Wilderness Survival Skills was taken.
Okay, Wild Survival Skills, and then they'd see the classes that you offer there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and you have to be 18.
That's not true. I do a bunch of kids classes. Kids as young as like 5 or 6. The last classes I just did in Connecticut, I have a series of 7 kids classes.
Okay.
And probably, generally like a little older than that, but yeah, kids are definitely welcome. I love teaching kids because they're like super into, like, what kid doesn't love making fires in the woods and building forts and setting traps for squirrels? Like, it really, it catches on with kids really cool. And again, like we were saying, like when you trace back what influenced you to be who you are, like, it's so cool to be like, cool, I'm dropping the seed in these young kids' minds of like, you should get out into nature and get away from your computer for a minute. Like, you can have adventures and do also stimulating things out in the woods.
Yeah, my son did a little mini survival camp in the summer a couple years ago, and yeah, those kids, they loved it. They were like, man, like exactly what you're saying. Like, what kid doesn't like to be able to make fires and that's basically one of the kids' comments was, I love this because Enoch, that's my son's name, will let us build fires anytime we want.
Yeah, and it's cool that, like, I get even, you'll get these tough kids that are used to just being pains and not listening and all that stuff, and all of a sudden I really try to push them past their level of comfort, and they're acting all tough until you're like, oh, okay, cool, let's go like do stick fighting 20 feet up in a tree. And they're just like, wait, what? And this isn't normal, but you get to kids to their place where they're slightly like being pushed, and then all of a sudden they stop being tough guys and they start listening, and they're like, oh, I'm into this. And then they get really excited of like, adults are finally allowing me to like make a huge fire and set traps and hunt and the things that like their instincts kind of tell them to do, that, but that parents and everything else kind of normally try to suppress because it's a little too wild. And so I really like that aspect of allowing kids to be kids and getting them out and tapping into that instinct that I think we all have that has been kind of beat down in us. And even in adults, like I find that when people tap into that, and adults, I have, sometimes I'll do 2-week-long classes of survival training, and adults come out and they're like, like, I just feel happier out here. Like I'm kind of a, miserable person in my normal life. I'm not that happy, but I've tapped into this instinct of being out here, living in a community, sitting around a fire, carving sticks or breaking rocks to make a spear. And there's something that just feels so right about that. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is like that untapped intrinsic feeling that it just feels right to do this stuff, because we've only not been doing this stuff for 500 or maybe 1,000 years. Before that, we've been doing this for 100,000 years. And so there's so much part of people's instincts that don't even know it, but it's part of who they are. And it feels right when you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that's awesome that you're also you're able to reach kids that might not others. So do you have classes right now up on your site for kids, or is that usually something that an organization will come to you with?
I actually just finished a big series of that, and now I've got a bunch of private stuff, so I don't have anything up on my schedule for that. But yeah, by the later like July, August, I'm going out into the Midwest all July to do a bunch of stuff, and then probably by August, September, I'm going to open up public classes again. So
okay. So if people are like in school and stuff like that, and they want to check out your classes and they're younger, probably the beginning of the summer is the best time to kind of early summer when they get out of school, check it out probably.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just around this time. I mean, it all depends. It's just like I got a call for all of July to just be like, hey, can you run this series of private classes in the Midwest?
Gotcha.
Have a potential August, this tech, very rich tech guy that wants to go up to Alaska with his kids for the same idea of like, he's just like, I just want my kids to like not be little crappy, rich kids when they grow up. I want them to be, responsible, know how to take care of themselves, know what it's like to like do their own dishes, or like be responsible for setting up a camp and things like that. So we're going to go do that.
Yeah. So I was a Boy Scout, and you don't get quite those same kind of experiences, but at one summer we did a sailing trip, and we're sailing around the Finger Lakes up in New York, and in the middle of the night, the boat came loose, allegedly. And we got woken up and had to jump into the lake. And I'm pretty convinced that that was all a setup. That the instructor was like, "Hey, I'm going to wake them up. I'm going to make them jump into the lake and pull the boat back to shore." But it was fun. It was definitely memorable. Like it did stink to have to jump into the lake, like, hey, emergency situation. But that's probably one of the main things I remember from that entire trip. So I think it is good to push yourself.
Yeah. And what's cool is I've had this comment a lot lately is when I've done groups like that, is the people that have known these kids ahead of time are like, wow, like, it's not the kid that shines in school that's getting the straight A's and all the rewards. It's the class president that shines on those trips. So again, it's this great equalizer where it's like the total like rebellious kid that nobody thinks has any potential in the normal world is the first one to be like, cool, I'm jumping in the lake, I'm going to go get that boat and I'm going to haul it back. And he's the big hero. And so I think it's really cool to see how those types of challenges bring out the unrecognized potential in a lot of people that otherwise are kind of told by society that they're not doing well enough, or they're not smart enough, or they're not this or that. And that's one of my big things is like, I love to see tapping into that, because in school I was completely disinterested. I just stared out the window, dreaming of hopping boxcar trains, and had no real interest in the chalk and talk kind of thing. And it wasn't until I moved out into the woods for that year I really learned what I was like when I was passionate about something. And I just became so passionate about survival that my brain just completely switched on. And I dumped myself into books and research and everything else. And I became, started to recognize like, oh, I'm actually really smart when I'm interested in something, and really learned like how my brain works and how I think. And unfortunately for 17 years of my life, I was kind of told like, oh, you're not going to succeed. You're not doing well in this and that. And, after living in the woods and then teaching survival for 5 years, I went back to college and I had a 4.0 and I went on to, a good grad school and all that stuff. But I think that's another good thing is like, let's find a way to bring out everybody's strengths. And again, that's what happens in these classes is this communal living where it's like, somebody's going to be amazing at making fire. Somebody's going to be amazing at spearing fish. And everybody falls into this role where everybody has value. It's not just like one test. And if you don't pass it, then you don't have a strength. I really value that about these classes too, is it naturally happens, but everybody finds the spot where they can contribute.
Yeah. And, I think, we actually, we homeschool, actually we unschool our kids. So we let them pretty much decide what they want to do. Like if they want to, spend all day drawing, they can spend all day drawing. If they want to, my son really likes game design, so he spends a lot of time learning about game design and working with a friend to like develop a game and stuff. And so, it's easy to look at our school system and say, it's broken, right? Like we're leaving so many of these kids who are smart kids, but they just have no interest in either the format or the topics. Mm-hmm. That our school system is able to provide. But at the same time, it's like, how would you integrate all of those things? Like, I mean, like it obviously it costs money to be able to go and do a survival class, or to be able to go and do these sort of alternative things that would help kids that wouldn't otherwise be. So I don't know what the solution is there. But I like that we unschool. I like that our kids have the freedom to decide. And I was really skeptical at doing it at first. My wife was like, "We're going to do this," and I'm like, "How are they going to learn how to read?" Like basic stuff. And I was surprised. Like we had a book called 100 Easy Lessons of Reading, and I think we went through it once with our kids. each. And our son kind of struggled with reading a little bit. And then he got into a game that you had to read for. And he started learning to read because he wanted to play this game. And then also at the same time, my daughter, who's younger than him, immediately younger than him, she started reading. She picked it up just super fast. And I could just tell, I don't know if it was conscious or unconscious. He was like, I'm not letting my younger sister read better than me. And so then his reading, just sort of took off from there.
That competitive streak as somebody that's guiding me, like, oh, okay, I know how to get him to do what I want to do. I just like praise his sister a little bit. And,
yeah, but when we started, I mean, we made a lot of mistakes. We kind of were like, basically, we homeschooled and was basically like public school at home. And we're like, hey, you have to do this and you have to do that. And we were also living in New York State, and they're like, hey, you have to do all these things and write out your whole plan and tell us exactly what you're going to do. And so we felt like this compulsion to be like, hey, we said we were going to do this, now we have to do it. And it was just a fight and a struggle, and we're just like, like this constant bickering. And then we got smart and we're like, hey, if we write this very vague stuff for the school system, and we say we're going to read some books about this topic, and we're going to do some activities about this topic, and it was just a lot more loose, and it may include these books. So we got a lot more creative and just allowed them to kind of do what they want, and I think that's made a huge difference for them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having this kid once, and it was a private class totally just for this kid, because he was his parents were like, he just has total ADD. He can never concentrate on anything. He's just terrible in school. And I was hanging out with him, and he was a really nice kid, and he just apologized. He's like, oh yeah, sorry, I just can't pay attention to anything. Like, I've just got ADD. And I remember he kept telling me about how he loved graffiti and spray painting and tagging and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, when you're in the middle of, do you do big murals on walls and all this stuff? And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, when you're in the middle of, tagging something or creating this big mural, like, does your attention wander, and are you constantly pulled away from doing that because you can't pay attention to it? And he's like, oh no, I'll sit there for like 10 hours and work on a mural. And I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with your attention. It's just you're incredibly passionate about that. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, your mind is going to be working really, really well. And that's what I learned when I was in the woods, was like, oh, this is how I tap into making my brain work really well, is I have to be excited about it. And so, like I said, when I did go back to college, I found a way. I was just like, if I'm studying a subject, I have to find a way to get myself to be really excited about what this is, or else my brain will completely wander off. And so I almost like tricked myself into thinking like, oh my God, like anthropology is so much fun. And then I would be very tuned in, my brain would work great.
Yeah. My son found the same thing. Like he wasn't all that interested in history, but as he started designing games, and there was like sort of this world building aspect to it, history all of a sudden became relevant. Like, oh, how did these people function, and how did these societies function, and yeah, you're right. You have to kind of put it in the context of what you're passionate about and what you're interested in, and then it all of a sudden clicks.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing the percentage of people that come out in the woods and are just like, oh, cool, and I just think, again, it's that intrinsic thing that like people get passionate about it, where it's like you get people that you would never think, kids especially, but you'd never think they're like, oh, cool, I'm gonna get dirty and covered in ticks and all of that. And it takes a minute, but then once they click into it, everybody's really focused and exciting on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say the difference is, like, because you've got these videos of you doing stuff on your YouTube channel. What's the value in it for people? I mean, as far as, obviously there's way more value in actually going and doing the experiences and taking a class. What are they going to get from the videos though, specifically?
I think there's a lot I try to pack it with a lot of information. But again, like we said, like information is only takes you so far. I think if anything, like just inspiring people to get outside, like, we're all, the amount of addiction of staring at cell phones and watching YouTube videos is overwhelming. And it's only, a solid 10, 15 years that it's addictive. So, and it's only getting more and more addictive every single year. So it's like, if people are spending 5 or 6 hours a day or longer now looking at computers and phones for entertainment, like it's going to be, twice as addictive in 5 years. And so I guess I like the idea of just trying to say like, okay, even though you're on your computer, you're stuck to this thing, I want to inspire you to just get outside, have adventures, do things that are more empowering. While a computer and your cell phone and social media can be very stimulating, it's not empowering. You don't get that same feeling as if like, oh, I just sat in a field and I wove a basket, or I challenged myself to make a fire and I pulled it off. Like those kind of things are super empowering. And I think maybe it's a bridge, using social media to get people to go outdoors and, come take a class with me or come go do anything, like get out, do anything. And it's a losing battle. I mean, I think technology is probably going to win. It's so addictive. But I just like the idea of inspiring people that like, why survival is cool. It's kind of been reframed. Something I love very much and I'm passionate about has been reframed by Hollywood to be this like miserable, like, I'm on TV and I'm suffering and this is terrible and I don't know anything about the landscape. So obviously I don't know what to do. And survival's, this guy sitting on a glacier with a rusty pocket knife, freezing his butt off, and showing them like, if you know your landscape intimately, and you're creative and you've got a bag of tricks, you can put all those things together and come up with this amazing adventure and live off the land as if it's, just this veritable grocery store where you go around and just pick up edible plants and put them in a bag and you can eat it. And so part of it is to influence people to go out in the woods. The other half is to show people that like survival isn't this huge mystery. It doesn't have to be this horrible suffering kind of thing. And that if you know your landscape really well, it's actually pretty easy. And you can see that when I go out for these weeks, it's like, I've studied these areas a lot. And so when I go out, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And there can be little tricks here and there, but I love that creative process and that challenge of like figuring it out. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just combating those two things, the technology and the idea that survival is miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in one of your videos, you quoted someone, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but said something along the lines of, if you're doing survival and you're miserable, you're doing it wrong.
That was something my teacher used to say. He was a little more arrogant about it than I was, but he would say, if you're in survival and you're miserable, it just means your skills suck.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously sometimes it's just hard. Like I've had some situations not go the way I wanted them to. But there's something to say about that. And like, if I go out in the East Coast where I grew up, that I know every plant and every tree, I know exactly what to do. Like there's nothing miserable about it. Like it's the easiest thing in the world to just go out there and every day provide enough food for yourself. And so, yeah, it's just all about how much you know, how much you can reach into that huge bag of tricks that you have and combine different ideas together. And you take a trigger mechanism you learned in the Amazon and mix it with one that the Eskimos used to use, and then you put them together and it makes the perfect trap for, the animal that you've never been able to trap before. And I really like that idea of like that creative process.
So do you still get out and do like go and find other like cultures like you used to, and like go and try to learn and everything from that you can from them? Like, are you still pretty active in that?
Yeah, I have been. I mean, COVID shut me down with traveling, but before that, I'd probably been traveling nonstop for about 3 years, running classes. And then, so I was being like Tonga, running an island class. And then I would just hang out with the Tongan people and learn like, oh, how do we make clothing out of the fibers off of, what do they call it? I call it Haiti, but this certain type of tree bark that they use out there. To make fibers and clothes, or how do we go fishing, or, so I'm always, anytime I'm traveling, like I take a couple of weeks or a month off after a class to travel around and find remote people to learn from.
I was in Tonga. Tonga is a pretty cool place. There was a, I guess there was something, I forget, like they had made something out of like old videotape ribbon, right?
Okay.
Like they'd taken the ribbon and made like some, I don't know, placemat or something, blanket or something like that. And someone was like, that doesn't seem very authentic. And, the person who I was visiting, who had been there for a few months, she's like, no, this is very authentic. For Tongans, you use what you have. Like
Native people are so pragmatic, where I was with the Aborigines and we were making atlatls, which is It's basically takes a spear and it's a spear chucker. And so it's almost like the dog ball thrower that makes your dog ball go farther when you throw the ball at the beach. So you attach that to the back of a spear, and we're making one and we're tying it all together. It's all made out of wood and primitive materials. And I'm like, oh, now they're like, now we have to glue it together. And I'm like, all right, cool. Like, how do we get glue? Like, where do we find it? And they're like, oh, right here. And they take a piece of a plastic bucket that was lying around and they start melting it all over. And they're like, that's glue. And I'm like, no, like, come on. Like, I'm trying to do this off the landscape. So we tracked down this old lady that was like the last lady that knew how to do these things primitively. But for them, they're just like, well, it's here. Like, it's practical. We don't have that same ethos of like being a purist as you do. Like, whatever we have, we're going to use it.
Yeah. I've also heard, like, I guess some people who like, I heard one person who was like, did survival, right, and basically lived off the land. They would go dumpster diving, and they said people will, put me down for going and doing dumpster diving. But he's like, that's primitive. I mean, if an animal can get into a dumpster and get that food, it's going to do it. So like, if I can do it, then that's what I'm going to do. Like, so.
Yeah. It's the funny thing with Native people is they're not the environmentalists that you think they are. It's just that the system that they live in is created where everything biodegrades. But, I mean, yeah, hanging out in the Amazon with different tribes, if there was ever a plastic wrapper on something, they would just chuck it in the river. And you'd be like, well, what are you doing? You can't just throw plastic in the river. Oh, no, it's okay. It just goes away. Like 20 miles downriver is off the edge of the world.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, what's the problem with cutting down trees? Like, there's 10 trillion of them everywhere. Like, why would we not cut down trees? Or, a forest or something like that. Like, so it's the mentality is very different. It's just whatever you have to do. Yeah. So very
yeah. Yeah. They're not, I think sometimes in like Western culture, we get this, this idea, and it's not new. It's not a new, but you have this idea of like the romanticized version of survival.
right.
And I think that romanticized versions of survival are a modern convenience. Because
a privileged way of acting, of like, oh no, I'm not going to eat that thing over there. I have to get it off of the landscape. So
yeah, or use this plastic bottle to, carry around water or whatever. Because, I mean, you're just going to use what you have if you were ever in a situation like that.
Yeah. And I mean, we realize that on like the island trips that we do is like when I send people out and I'm just like, all right, you're literally like nothing. You're taking only the crafts that you made for the first 5 days. They find a plastic bottle, it's gold, and you realize like, oh my God, it's so valuable to have this like washed up plastic bottle on the beach or like a bucket that they find. They're like, oh my God, it's a chair, and every piece of styrofoam a huge tool and an asset to survival. And you don't prioritize one thing over the other. It's whatever helps you live.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun to get to know you.
Are you in an underground bunker right now, or what?
So yeah, this is our engine room. That engine will be taken out eventually because it's old and it's way too big for us. But yeah, we've got a 6,000 square foot underground bunker, and we're renovating it into a home. And that's part of our adventure. This is the thing that I saw it and I thought, that's it. That's what I'm doing. And it's fun.
Incredible.
It beats me up every day. I've got the scars and the bruises and the scrapes and cuts and wonky finger now to show how much it's beaten me up, but I love it.
So do you find it, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you find that people, I mean, you've got your underground bunker, you've got your plan for, the first 2 years of food storage and all of that. Do you find that people that are I don't even know, to be honest, but do you find that people that are doing that have the plan of like, what am I going to do after that? Like, how do I get back onto the earth and start living off the land? Are they interested in primitive survival stuff?
I think so. I mean, I think that's like the natural, like, I mean, because I mean, I think if you look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Like you're thinking, okay, and I think sometimes with the Maslow hierarchy of needs in a modern society, you're working backwards, right? Because you're starting with convenience, as most of us, right? Like I have money, I have a job, or a business in my case. I've got some creature comforts. So my priority right now is fix the bunker, but eventually it's going to be, I've got 13 acres. Now what can I do with the land? How can I be more self-sufficient? How can I, my wife would love it if like we could just say, hey, for a year, we're not going to buy anything. We're not going to, buy anything. We're not going to spend any money. I don't know if we can do that because we do like having the internet, but anyway, so yeah. So I think that does come. Like you think like, oh, okay, once I have this, but then what's next?
Yeah, what happens like 2 years after nuclear fallout? Like, how do you get out of the bunker and continue?
And it's not that I'm worried about a nuclear fallout. That's not why we bought a bunker. Like I'm not preparing for the end of the world. I love the space, but at the same time, it's hard not to have a bunker and think, oh, okay, but if that did happen, if there was a nuclear explosion,
got to go all the way.
Yeah, I mean, and I used to teach art classes at a college, and I'd often tell my students when they're making art, I'm like, oh, like I see, like if you want to be like go edgy or gaudy or something that's like unexpected, like you can't go halfway with that. Like you gotta just go all the way and go for it, because otherwise it lacks the confidence that the piece that you're trying to make needs to really make it look intentional. So I think the same thing. Like if I'm gonna have a bunker, like you can't just ignore the fact that I'm in a bunker, right? Like I gotta consider that into my design and into my plans and into my build and everything. So
yeah, that's really cool. I can't wait to check it out more.
Yeah. So anyway, are there any other places? I'll just do a quick shout out. People can go to Tom Mcelroy Survival on YouTube. They can go to Wild Survival Skills. Got it right this time, I think. And is there anywhere else that people can go to check you out?
I guess Instagram's Wild Survival Skills, but I'm sure, just Google me, you'll find, I'm sure all that stuff will pop up. But yeah, Wild Survival Skills will get you everywhere you need to go.
And if they want to find classes, that's on Wild Survival Skills.
Yeah, that'll be up on my schedule once I finish a series of private classes that I have.
Yeah, definitely go check out his YouTube channel. He's got several videos there with, multiple millions of views for a reason. There's the island, there's the desert survival. I think more recently there was one where you go into a cave and make a cornflower, and that one gets a little bit more complicated, I think, than some of the ones to explain to people. But like, there's a lot of really good stuff. It's fun to watch too. Like if you're just looking for something fun to watch, because like, I'm sure a lot of people out there, like you've watched every show that's on TV about survival. This is better than all of those. So definitely go check those out. Cause like, anyway, I think you'll get real good practical skills by going and watching Tom's stuff. There's a ton of information. So anyway, go check it out.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye.